Hello and welcome to episode 31 of the Footy with Fletch podcast. Today I'm joined by Tanya Hosch, the General Manager of Inclusion and Social Policy at the AFL, a role that she's held since August 2016. Hello Tanya, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Good, thanks Fletch. Thanks for the invitation to be on your podcast.
It's going to be fantastic to talk to you today. I can obviously see you've got a photo of Adam Goodes behind you. Would he be one of your favourite Indigenous players to watch?
Oh, absolutely. I miss seeing Adam play. And he's, someone I have enormous respect for off the field as well. And he's obviously still making important contributions to the country. So, definitely miss watching him play. I guess what I'm lucky about is that there's no shortage of Indigenous players coming through the system all the time that play well and, make me and so many other Indigenous Australians really proud.
How did you sort of first fall in love with AFL footy?
Yeah, great question. So it goes back to my youth, which was, as you can tell, some time ago. I grew up in South Australia and that's where I still live. And so I used to go to the footy with my dad to watch Sandful games, and we followed Redlegs, Norwood Football Club, not because we lived near there, but because my dad worked near there. And he was involved in some local competitions at the Kensington Hotel, darts and pool. And so we became involved with Norwood Football Club. And it was just one of those things I really enjoyed with my dad. My dad loved watching all sorts of sport, but Aussie rules was probably his favourite. He's originally from New South Wales. And so, he used to like NRL as well. But he did, obviously, the longer he was in South Australia, the more he fell in love with Aussie rules. And it was just something that came from that. And then when I was a bit older and I was in high school and starting to really experience overt racism myself, I noticed that one of the times that Aboriginal people were cheered for and celebrated was when they were playing footy at whatever level, because of that black excellence that used to be on display. And I think that was what made me fall in love with the game, just seeing those moments and those glimpses of support and respect being shown for the skill and aptitude of Indigenous players. And so I think the connection for that, between that and the connection that I had with my dad, who's passed away now, but, I don't often watch a footy game without thinking about my dad.
Yeah, you're so lucky to be a part of the great game and to work in the AFL. And like you said, we're so lucky to be able to watch so many great Indigenous AFL players as well. When you were sort of younger, did you ever think that you'd end up working in sport and working at the AFL in the role that you currently hold?
Oh, goodness, no, not at all. I never, ever anticipated that I'd end up working in sport. It wasn't something I planned or had aspired to. It was just something that sort of happened and an opportunity was presented to me. And, it was such a good opportunity and a good offer. I felt like it was the right thing to do. One of the things about sport in general is it just provides a great unifying platform for people from all different walks of life and perspective to come together to enjoy one thing, and that one thing we have in common. And that means it's a great platform for really important conversations about social change, which is what I'm passionate about. So to be able to, work in a sporting code that I genuinely enjoy watching and have grown up with, and, would choose to be at, even if it wasn't part of my work, is great when I can combine it with things that I'm passionate about, which is, dealing with trying to eradicate discrimination.
You mentioned earlier that you are based in South Australia. How difficult is it for you to juggle your time in South Australia with coming back to AFL House in Melbourne?
Yeah, well, Fletch, I think that's one of the upsides from COVID, we all had to pivot and work out how to stay connected, even if we couldn't be in the same location. And so pre-COVID, I probably did fly back and forth between Melbourne and Adelaide, which isn't a huge distance. So that definitely made that easier. But I don't travel to Melbourne as often as I did before COVID. And that's been a real relief, because being on planes all the time isn't that fun. And anyone that does that, I think, will agree with that. But yeah, I don't just come to Melbourne. It's a national game, so I get to go to all different parts of the country. That's one of the great things about my job, is working with people all across Australia in relation to sport and social policy. But yeah, if you do too much travel, it can definitely knock you around. But I'm not alone in that, and it is nice now that I ask people to come to me in Adelaide as well, so that's good.
You're very lucky to sort of be able to have the best of both parts of the world. What exactly does your role at the AFL? You're the manager of inclusion and social policy. What does that entail?
Yeah, look, every day is different. You never know quite what you're going to get. My team and I, what we're responsible for across the business, is engaging in issues to help the game be as inclusive as possible. So one of the things that we say about Aussie Rules footy is that it's a game for everyone, and our job is to try and make sure that that's true. And so, obviously the tradition of football was that it was, very white male orientated, and the world has changed a lot, and so has football. And so we look at issues of inclusion for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people from the LGBTQI community, people from culturally and religiously diverse backgrounds, people with disabilities, women who have typically been underrepresented across the code, whether that be on field or off field in the administration and leadership of the game and coaching and umpiring and things of that nature. So we're looking at issues like that to try and increase the participation of people from marginalised or diverse backgrounds in every level of the game. And so I started just before the first season of AFLW. So I was very fortunate to be here at the first game of women's football at the elite level. And that has changed the game significantly as well, from the perspective of gender, and also taking into account that intersectionality between women and all the other forms of diversity that exist amongst women as well. So there's never a day where I'm not learning something different. And it means having conversations with the parts of our business that are, say, responsible for broadcasting of the game, and having conversations with the team that are negotiating a new broadcast deal to see what inclusions we might be able to get into that contract to help improve the diversity of the broadcast of the game, for example. Having a look at what it is about the way that football clubs have always worked, and how do we support clubs to be fully inclusive of the women players, seeking to support women who want to work in football. One of the things we're working on at the moment is a strategy to improve the cultural diversity of the participation in the game at all levels. And that means consulting people in the community who feel a long way away from football, or don't feel welcome to come to the football, or don't see themselves represented in the game, and finding out from them what it is that we can do to address that.
It's a fantastic role that you have. And like you mentioned, you just got to the AFL before the AFLW commenced. Looking to where it is now, 18 teams, you must be so proud of how far the competition has come.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been around for 6 years and 7 grand finals, and in both codes. When the AFLW grand final was held in season 7, it will have been for both codes. And I've seen a huge amount of change in that time. And when I came into my role, I was the first person to ever have a role like mine. I was the second woman and first Indigenous person ever on the AFL Executive. And so that's given me a unique opportunity to see the game from a sort of quite high level, every element of the game. One of the things I do enjoy is engaging with the clubs, because clubland is very different to AFL House. We're the regulator, so our role is really different to what happens in clubs. And so, you know, we're here to support them as well. And that means being able to understand what their challenges are and where they might need some advice and support, because they're much smaller organisations than the AFL is as a whole. So, yeah, I mean, my job is really about people, and you know, I like being around people, and, you know, I believe that sport can be transformational in terms of helping people come together, understand each other better, and, you know, demonstrate respect for all people. So, you know, I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunities I've had to date.
You mentioned before that you're the first ever Indigenous person and the second woman in the AFLW or the AFL ranks. How important is that for you when you look back on your time at the AFL? It must be really special to you as well.
Yeah, look, it was a real honour and privilege to be the first Indigenous person on the executive. You know, a lot of work to progress and support Indigenous progression through the game had happened before my arrival. But being at that decision-making level of the organisation definitely made a difference to me, one, understanding the whole structure and ecosystem, which is Australian rules football, but also to be able to speak on issues that aren't just in my domain. So, you know, being in conversations at very senior levels about, you know, issues like concussion, you know, understanding what it is that we need to achieve for AFLW, understanding some of the demands that need to be met to make sure that we're presenting the best possible game and fan experience. And my job needs to be able to have outcomes across all of those different elements. So that means working with all different parts of the business. You know, I was really excited the day that we announced the first ever Aboriginal person appointed to the AFL Tribunal, which was Peter Matera. And that was a really exciting day to see that happen. And it was really overdue. But being in a position to talk to Steve Hocking, who was the head of football operations, now celebrating as the CEO of Geelong Football Club, no doubt, you know, he was the one that made the decision about Peter Matera, but it was me being able to talk to him about having some inclusion and diversity on that AFL tribunal as a real asset, and he definitely agreed. So I don't have an operational role, so any achievements that myself and my team might appear to have, it's only because we're collaborating right across the business.
And there are unfortunately still issues with racism in Australia and in the AFL as well. What do you sort of think the AFL might need to do to sort of tackle these issues moving forward?
Yeah, that's something we've got to be absolutely vigilant about. You know, I'm certainly not naive enough to think that we can solve these issues, but I do think that we've got to work really hard and be consistent. Often say to people, different organisations, if I'm giving a speech or, you know, interviewed by them about what I do, I say the key is trying to be consistent. No one's perfect. But you have to be consistent, to be very clear with everybody about what your values are and what you stand for. And that can be really difficult sometimes, particularly when, you know, someone has not necessarily overtly intended to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, but those things still have to be addressed. Everyone's got to be educated and understand their responsibilities. And the fact is that in Australia, we do have legislative requirements to not discriminate against people, and that is part of what we need to do. We can't control the behaviour and actions of everyone who buys a football ticket or might have a view online, whether they've come to the football or not. But certainly we've got to have the right policies and processes in place to address those things and keep sending messages about our expectations that if you're part of the football community, then there are standards that we expect you to uphold. Football players are doing their job. They deserve to be respected no matter who they are and what their background is. And so we've got a lot more education work to do. We've got to do, I think, a lot more to help give encouragement and confidence to people who might have a racial discrimination complaint to make, so that they feel that I will be heard and understood and there will be some consequences for that action. Now, obviously, that takes a lot of work to do that well. And we've got a number of things that we're growing and building bit by bit to hopefully help with getting that message across.
You've got a very powerful message, and it's great to have you in at AFL House. What do you think have been some of the highlights of your time in your role at the AFL?
Oh, gee. Well, I'm Sydney Swan supporter, so the most recent grand final was not one of them. But, one of the moments that I just mentioned about Peter Matera's appointment to the AFL Tribunal, that was a real highlight because that was a significant moment. Also, the Nikki Winmar statue that was unveiled in 2019, because it was that iconic pose that was captured by Wayne Ludby, the photographer, of Nikki lifting his jumper and pointing to his skin, which was really not just a symbol of Nikki himself, but also his strength and, his determination as an Aboriginal man to not accept the racism that was being dished out to him. He's the first Aboriginal player statue to be erected, and that was a really significant moment. I think it'll be 30 years next year since that day that occurred, and that statue stands proudly on Noongar Whadjuk country outside Optus Oval in Perth, and that was a really great moment. And there was a lot of past Aboriginal players that gathered that day for the unveiling, and our CEO, Gil McLachlan, unveiled the statue with the Premier of Western Australia and Nikki himself on that day. And so many of those past players and people in the community were just so proud and excited to see that statue, because there's not a lot of commemorative symbols around Australia commemorating Aboriginal people, and to see one like that sadly is still relevant today because of racism, was a big moment, and I'm really proud to have played a part in that.
It definitely was a big moment in his career, but also in the AFL as well. What do you sort of do outside of your time of the office, and how do you sort of wind down and relax from what probably is a really busy lifestyle?
Oh, look, I just love to spend time at home with my family. Got a 15-year-old daughter and got 2 dogs and 2 cats. And, I like to not have to set an alarm in the morning. If I get to do that, that's pretty special. And I really enjoy walking. Walking is great for my mental health. And unfortunately, I've had a problem with my right foot for the last 18 months or so I haven't been able to do that. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to my regular walks and just, like most people, just catching up with friends and trying not to think about work all the time. But with footy, there's always something going on.
Who do you sort of most admire from your time at the AFL? It can be a person on the executive board, it can be a player. Who would someone like that be in your life?
Gee, that's a really rough question, Fletch. How do I choose just one? Look, there'd be many, many people I could mention, but one of the relationships that's become really important to me over the time is with Michael O'Loughlin, former Swans champion. who's become a great personal friend and professional support as well. He's really supported me since I've been in this role. We had a friendship before I was working at the AFL, so I'm very fortunate. But since I've been here, getting his insights, and he now sits on the Sydney Swans board, which is fantastic. He gives me great support and advice and guidance, and has helped me to understand a lot about the ins and outs of football culture and things that I would never have understood as someone who hasn't played the game at the highest level. All I did was play a little bit of footy in high school.
You're very lucky to have such a great role model. What do you think you want to do in, let's say it's 5 years' time down the track? Where do you see yourself? Do you still see yourself at the AFL, or where do you see yourself?
That is another good question, Fletch. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I think there's so much I can still be doing here that will keep me totally engaged, and work that's really important, and not just important to me, but to lots of people. So this is a place where I don't think I'd ever get bored or run out of things to do. I love so many of the people I work with, and the team that I work with is, small but really deadly, and we're all really committed to what it is that we're trying to do together. So honestly, don't know. You just never know. I've met so many people here who have been here for much longer than me, and I can see why. So who knows, Fletch?
2021, you were the South Australian Citizen of the Year recipient. What does that mean to you as well? It must be very special.
Yeah, it was a huge surprise. I didn't know that I was even nominated, and I never expected to win that award. So it was a huge surprise. And obviously, so many people in our communities do incredibly important work, and very few people get recognition for that work that they're doing. And so to get some of that recognition was a huge boost. I was very moved by it. I was really pleased for my family as well, because you can't do the work that I do without a lot of family support. And sometimes that means that I'm working when I could be with them. And, for them to see that recognition, I think was very good for them. And, I think they appreciated to know that other people value what it is that I'm doing. So it was very special. And I feel very, very fortunate.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for joining me today on the Footy with Fletch podcast. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks, Fletch, for having me. It was really great to meet you.
So there we have it, episode 31 with Tanya Hosch on the Footy with Fletch podcast. We'll be back with more episodes soon.